It's 1789, the Russo-Turkish War is in full flame. Last year, the Russians managed to capture the important stronghold of Ochakov. This victory allowed them to continue their advance deep into the Balkans. But the outbreak of the Russo-Swedish War diverted part of the Russian forces from operation in south of the country. The Austrians were preparing to cross the Danube and capture Belgrade. Rumyantsev was removed from command of the Ukrainian army. Potemkin became commander-in-chief of all Russian forces. The Russians crossed the Dniester and entered Kishinev and Yashin. The Ottoman commander Yusuf Pasha, sitting in Mashin, tried to drive the enemy's advanced units out of the Prelude. The attack ended in failure. Russian troops under der Felden launched a counter-offensive, won several skirmishes and took Galatz. Kamensky, the new commander of the Ukrainian army, ordered the city to be burned. The Russians returned to Prelude. On the Dniester, the Turks had the fortresses of Bendery and Akirman. Potemkin's army was to take control of this river line. Meanwhile, Sultan Abdul Hamid died. He was replaced by the more energetic Selim III. He wanted to regain the lost lands. Both armies spent May and June in inactivity. Potemkin was in no hurry to attack. He feared enemy landings at Ochakov and at Crimea. Another change in command slowed down the Russians' preparations. Kamensky was replaced by Repnin. His troops covered the slow movement of Yekaterinoslav army from Olivopol to Dniester. Russian supplies suffered due to flooding of the Dniester. Der Felden's division, 10,000 men, stationed at Prelude, was transferred to Suvorov. Alexander had to maintain contact with Prince Kurburg's Austrian corps and watch over the territory between the Prut and Seret rivers. Potemkin left Olivopol only in mid-July. At the same time, the Ottoman army under the command of Yusuf Pasha, 30,000 men strong, moved towards Focsani. Its target is Prince Kurburg with 18,000 men. Repnin ordered Suvorov to come to the rescue. Leaving part of his troops to guard the baggage train, Suvorov set out immediately. The march was fast, covering 50 miles in 36 hours. Now it was necessary to reach an agreement and further actions between the two commanders. Coburg wanted to meet with the Russian general in person, but Suvorov declined. Coburg had been promoted to full general earlier and had the right to leadership, but Alexander didn't want to give it up. Suvorov sent his Austrian colleague a plan for the upcoming battle. There was no time to argue. Coburg agreed. On August 1st, the combined Allied army, 25,000 men, met the enemy at Focsani. The Ottomans were defeated. The Allies lost 350 men. The Ottomans' casualties 1,600. The victors captured 12 cannons and 16 banners. The remnant of the army fled to Brailov and Bucharest. The two Allied generals finally met on the battlefield and congratulated each other on the victory. Coburg respected Suvorov and recognized his leadership. The Austrians and Russians returned to their previous positions. Suvorov argued for an offensive, but it was not up to him to decide. Everyone was waiting for Potemkin. On August 20, the vanguard of Potemkin's army was near Kishinev, and the main forces entered Dubusari the next day. Repnin's army was between Yashi and Prelude. The Grand Vizier was eager to avenge the defeat at Focsani and planned an offensive in Moldavia to drive the Allies out of there. To distract Potemkin's army, he ordered Hasan Pasha to march northwest from Izmail with 30,000 men. This maneuver would also cut off Suvorov's retreat. Potemkin ordered Repnin to march against Hasan. On September 18, Repnin won a series of skirmishes. Hassan did not dare to continue the fight and retreated back to Ismail. Repnin, taking into account the weakness of the enemy following their defeat, attempted to capture the fortress. However, it quickly became clear that Ismail was far too strong. The bombardment proved pointless and Repnin retreated. The vizier arrived in Prelude. His huge army, numbering between 90,000 men and 100,000 men with 80 guns, began its march towards Rymnik. Suvorov suspected that the Ottomans' main attack would again be aimed at Austrians. He moved his 7,000 men towards Focsani. The Russians were ready to join forces with Coburg at any moment. Finally, Coburg's letter for help arrived. After a short hesitation, the troops moved out. The rivers were flooded. The march was exhausting and swift, in Suvorov's style. On the morning of September 21st, Suvorov joined forces with Coburg near Focsani. The total number of allies was 25,000 men and 73 cannons. Coburg was concerned about the enemy's significant superiority, 4-1. The discussion continued. Finally, after Suvorov threatened that the Russians would launch the offensive on their own, Coburg agreed to attack together. Suvorov personally went on reconnaissance to the Rymna river. The Ottoman army was camped on this river in 4 camps. The distance between the first and fourth camp was 8 miles. Meanwhile, the vizier had been standing still for several days, waiting for news from east. A large number of supply trains significantly hampered army's maneuverability. The terrain was marked by forests, ravines and cornfields. On September 22, before sunrise, the Allies quietly approached the Rymna river. It was shallow, so the troops crossed it on foot. Everything was done in an orderly and secretive manner, hidden from the enemy. The Russians were closer to the enemy vanguard, near the village of Tirgokokoli. Suvorov lined up the infantry in 2 lines of squares. The Cossacks, Carabineers and Austrian Hussars lined up behind them in 2 more lines. The Austrians lined up with their back to the river in 9 squares, arranged in 2 lines. Major General Karachkai with the 10th square and Hussars was in the gap between Coburg's and Suvorov. Suvorov had to execute a wide flanking maneuver. First, he had to take the first camp, then move to the flank of the second. Coburg was expected to hold the enemy's large forces, while the Russians carried out their task. A general attack by the Allies on the second camp was planned. The weather was clear. Suvorov wasted no time and began advancing on the first camp along the Rymna river. The Ottoman forces were positioned on high ground here. The Russians' path lay through cornfields and thick, tall weeds, which slowed their advance. Soon, skirmishes with Turkish patrol began. When the Russians approached, enemy artillery opened fire. Russian guns responded in kind. Suddenly, a deep ravine appeared in front of the fortifications, with only one narrow road crossing it. The infantry hesitated, but Suvorov gave them no time to think. The right flank square boldly crossed the ravine and attacked the Ottoman battery with bayonets. This causes part of the enemy forces to flee south. The Ottomans surrounded this square for a short time, but more and more Russian forces joined the battle. Suvorov was in the middle square of the first line. Meanwhile, the Cossacks and Austrian Hussars broke into the camp from the rear. The enemy's morale is broken, and now all the Turks are fleeing south. Suvorov stops the Cossacks from pursuing the enemy. The battle was just beginning. Meanwhile, Coburg advanced on the second camp. He is met by the large Ottoman cavalry. They surrounded the Austrians from the front and flanks. The Austrians fight bravely and hold their ground. The vizier was suffering from a fever, but he still commands from the second camp. He noticed a large gap between the allies and decided to cut them off. The Ottomans from the Bogza village attacked Karachai's square. The charge was so strong that the Austrians barely maintained their positions. Suvorov sent 2 battalions to Karachai's aid. After a fierce fighting, the Turks were repelled. The Ottomans attempted to attack Suvorov's left flank. The center square moved to put the enemy under crossfire. The cavalry arrived in time to repel the enemy. The Ottomans retreated and joined forces with those falling back after the assault on Karachai. Together they rushed at the Russians. They were met with devastating fire and an attack by Karachai on the right flank. The exhausted Turks began to retreat to Bogza. In despair, the enemy cavalry again charged the Austrian left flank. It was without result. The Russians bypassed the Kayata forest before attacking the second camp. Suvorov gave his troops half an hour to rest. The battle order of the troops, which had been battered after the battle, was restored. Both sides were silent and preparing for the final clash. The next target is Bogza. Here and ahead of the Krigumaylor forest, the Turks have built several batteries. In addition, they built trenches in front of the forest, but didn't have time to finish them. Still, the position was strong. So far, the Allied army had only faced the enemy's cavalry, while the infantry defended the second camp. At 1 p.m. the Allied troops set off. The Grand Vizier assembled a powerful force in front of the forest. A huge wave rushed at Coburg. The greatest pressure was on the Austrian left flank. The squares repelled one enemy attack after another. The Hussars broke into the Turks' dense masses, where they repelled and attacked again. The Austrians could not hold back this offensive for long. Coburg sent several officers to Suvorov with a request for help, but Alexander did not change his plan. The Russian squares, stubbornly advancing, pushed back the Turkish cavalry and take Bogza. The Turkish cannons were taken to the rear. The Ottomans, noticing Suvorov's movement, hesitated and stopped their attacks on the Austrians. They began to retreat slowly. The Vizier's army suffered fierce crossfire from the Allies. The squares of the first Russian line spread out, and part of the cavalry moved in. The rest of the horses remained on the flanks, and some were kept in reserve. The Allies advanced. Finally, they formed a single concave line. The Ottomans held their fortifications. Suvorov decided to storm them and deliver the final blow. He asked Coburg to assist in the attack. Soon, the Allies' fire made the enemy cannons fall silent. Suvorov sent all the cavalry forward. The infantry follows the horses at a rapid pace. Cossacks, Carabineers and Hussars quickly overcome the unfinished fortifications and break into the camp. The Turks defend themselves desperately, but the pressure of the Allies is too strong. The Ottomans' morale breaks. The Allies' cavalry chased the fleeing enemy into the forest. The infantry came up and joined into the slaughter. The Grand Vizier tried to stop the fleeing crowds, even ordering the cannons to fire several shots at them. But it was impossible to stop the fleeing army. The Ottomans lost the will to fight. In the chaos, some of the enemy's ammunition exploded. At 4 p.m., the fate of the battle was decided. Some allied soldiers cleared the forest of enemies. The Turks left their largest camp near Martineshti and attempted to cross the other side of the river. Thousands of people, horses, and carts filled the water. Many drowned. The Allies' sabers ended the Ottomans' suffering. The Allied army was exhausted and had no strength left to pursue. But Suvorov was satisfied with what they achieved. The Allies celebrated their victory. The next day, they captured the last fort camp and killed several hundred wandering Turks. The Allies captured a huge enemy convoy, 100 banners and 80 cannons. The Ottomans lost 15 to 20,000 men. An unknown number fled later. The Russians lost 170 men, while Austrians lost 450. For this great victory, Suvorov was awarded with the title Count of Rymnik. Catherine gave him the empire's highest military award, the Order of St. George, first class. Joseph ennobled Suvorov as Count of the Holy Roman Empire. Coburg became a field marshal. The Grand Vizier took refuge in Brailov and tried to gather what remained of his army. A few weeks later, he died of illness. After Rymnik, a further advance into the Balkans across the Danube seemed natural, but Potemkin was not as decisive commander as Suvorov. The Russians returned to Birlad. The defeat of the Vizier's army forced the Ottoman fortresses on the Dniester River to surrender, including the stronghold of Benderi. Coburg approached Bucharest and took it without a fight. The Austrians also occupied Belgrade. This marked the end of the 1789 campaign.